Hey, it's the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robeson, and today you'll notice something different. I'm coming to you as a Substack only live stream for complicated reasons that don't bear discussing. But what does bear discussing is what happened just a few hours ago, the jumping off point for what I know is going to be an amazing legal discussion today with two incisive writers and great minds. That jumping off point is this morning's action in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where acting Attorney General Todd Blanche had his path to be the full-time Attorney General of the United States smoothed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, at the risk of spraining a shoulder, patting myself on the back. In the past two episodes of my weekly political rehab show here on Substack with my Republican counterpart, Matt Wiley, I've repeatedly said that Texas Senator John Cornyn and North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis were just looking for an excuse, a fig leaf, the least available reason to fold. Todd Blanche gave them one Sunday night, and they folded. And now the consequences. Trump's tax returns, the settlement / slush fund, the Epstein files. We're going to get into all of that and a lot more with former Assistant U.S. Attorney and NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirschner, and a true Substack star, novelist, a bulldog investigative reporter who's made a name for herself as one of the world's premier experts on the Epstein saga, Ellie Leonard. Glenn, Ellie, welcome.
Oh,
Hi.
great to be here, Matt. I'm glad to be here with the Epstein Files whisperer, Ellie.
I'm glad to hang with you too,
For
Glenn.
people who don't know, and you should subscribe to her immediately. Ellie, you have made yourself, you are a self-made person. You have made yourself a world-renowned expert on this tragic story, and we're going to get into a lot more about it in just a second. Glenn, I feel like I have to start off with you at least a little bit, because we are talking about Todd Blanche. You have been talking a lot in your nightly community meetings. And if you're not yet subscribed to Glenn Kirschner, this is must viewing every night. This is like a balm of legal wisdom on my otherwise scorched mentality. It's soothing and yet provocative. So you've been covering the Blanche saga every single day. And today, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance him to be the Attorney General. It's not a done deal. It's not a fait accompli. There are some Senate votes. Susan Collins is concerned. I guarantee you that. She's troubled. So it's possible that he won't become the Attorney General, but it's now become overwhelmingly likely. On Sunday night, what got him here was posting two documents on Twitter. By Monday morning, these two Republican senators had completely given in. They were just looking for a predicate to do so. So, Glenn, just walk us through in these two documents, what did Todd Blanche actually give away to get these concessions and get these senators to vote for him?
That would be exactly nothing. And I want to start not with a point of light, Matt, but with a point of inevitability that actually mitigates just how horrific this development is. Todd Blanche was the acting Attorney General. Because Todd Blanche had been confirmed previously by the Senate as the Deputy Attorney General, he could remain acting Attorney General for the remainder of Donald Trump's term. He doesn't labor under the 120-day deadline. So this really doesn't make any appreciable difference in who is running the Department of Justice. That's cold comfort. That is very small consolation. But all of this was performative. And what it means legally, what Todd Blanche just did, it means nothing, because what he did was he said, okay, we've got this settlement agreement in place. And there are at least a couple of features of the settlement agreement. One is I created a $1.8 billion cop beaters fund for Donald Trump to distribute as he sees fit. And two, as an afterthought, because he did this on day two back in May, I'm also going to bestow this kind of made up tax immunity, an immunity against tax audits, not exactly cradle to the grave, but certainly cradle to the day I signed memo number 2 on May 19th. And it's not only, this tax shield that Donald Trump gets to hold up. I'm giving them out to his family members. I'm giving them out to his businesses. This is such a special kind of governmental insanity and abuse and corruption that it's hard to put words to it, at least from a guy who was a Fed for 30 years and 6 months. before I retired from the federal government. So what he did, because I have to have a long-winded run up to everything, Matt, you'll get used to that. What he did is he said, I am rescinding the first part of the settlement agreement that created the weaponization fund, the cop beaters fund, but I'm leaving in place the other part of the settlement agreement. And you know what he ignored entirely? The fact that federal judge Kathleen Williams has already ruled that the entire settlement agreement is null and void and invalid and a product of collusion and the fraud and a manipulation of the court. It doesn't exist legally. I understand Trump is appealing that ruling, but as of right now, the state of play is the federal courts have said it's not a settlement agreement. But Todd Blanche fumbles forward like it still is. And let me just add this as a footnote. He can revive the cop beaters fund anytime he wants, the minute he gets confirmed.
You know who does have quite a lot to say on this topic is all the people who have joined in the chat, and welcome to all of you. I love, if you're not familiar with my live stream, worth knowing, with Matt Robeson, please subscribe on Substack. I love to make this as interactive as possible. One of the things that you've really pioneered on Substack, Glenn, is the feel of being in a community meeting, having your streams be as interactive as possible. And I'll just point out Amy here saying, hey, y'all, in Texas, disgusted with Cornyn. Hopefully this betrayal will give another boost to the Tallarico campaign. Amen to that. Another person who had something to say was Brandon DeBuff of the NYU Tax Law Center, who on the record yesterday said, quote, these assurances from Blanche are not worth the paper they're written on. They don't pull back on the ongoing attempts to give the president, his family, and his affiliates unauthorized immunity from tax audits. I want to follow up on that point with you. My reading of this, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a simple former congressional staffer, but my reading of this is that since this immunity provision goes up through last year's tax return, on which Trump should be reporting the $2 billion he earned through his various crypto scams, it would be possible, in my reading of it, for Trump to file a tax return and pay anything, any amount that he wants, and not be subject to an IRS audit because he is immune. Now, maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe they can still make an assessment against him. Maybe there would be other repercussions, but is that as far as this immunity goes? Does he now have a complete get out of jail free card to do whatever he wants on any of his tax returns up through this most recent year?
I would say not expressly in that part of the settlement agreement, but practically speaking, if we can't conduct an audit, then we probably would have a tough time conducting a criminal investigation, and we would have an even tougher time actually holding him accountable, prosecuting him for tax fraud or his family members or his businesses. The only good news here is because this is not worth the paper it's written on, the next administration, and everybody please get to the polls, because come January 2029, the rule of law has to become a thing again. It has to come back into the light of day. And what we do is we criminally investigate Donald Trump for any suspected tax crimes if there's adequate predication. That's the magic term that means enough evidence to initiate a criminal probe. And then we prosecute him. And what Donald Trump does is he walks into court with his third-rate lawyers and he holds up the addendum saying, look, I have tax immunity of some sort, courtesy of Todd Blanche. And we litigate that issue, and Donald Trump very likely loses, because I'll go back to the fact that a federal judge has already invalidated the whole damn thing, including the tax audit immunity that Todd Blanche gave him. So listen, this is a temporary problem. But I'm telling you, I wake up every morning now and I look forward to the new Donald Trump abuse. You know why? Because it is causing more and more people to peel away from him, and it will drive people to the polls because he doesn't care about them. He only cares about himself. I don't want the abuses to slow down or ratchet back. I want them to accelerate because it only motivates us more. That's not Pollyanna. I think that's human nature.
Ellie, I desperately want to bring you in on this. I will just say, in response to one of the comments, there's so many excellent comments. I can't possibly address them all. I'll just point out this question from Sarah Mogill. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Sarah. She asks, why are Congress people idiots? Look, in over a decade working as a congressional staffer for multiple members of Congress. I can tell you that there are an awful lot of hardworking, wonderful people in Congress, truly. But unfortunately, American politics is the way it is, and we have constructed these districts that are like
Mhm.
orchid rearing hothouses for insanity. And you have people like Mike Johnson who are able to fall upwards and backwards into being the Speaker of the House. And it's because of the incentive structures that we give them and that they carve out for themselves through gerrymandering and other mechanisms. Much more on that at another time. Ellie,
Mhm.
um, the man the Senate is about to confirm, in all probability, is also the man sitting on the Epstein files. A federal judge has already found, my understanding, you're the expert, that he's conceded that he's in violation of the Transparency Act. So, what does it mean in your expertise and on the basis of your reporting if he gets this job permanently? What are the repercussions?
Well, I mean, that's hard to say because who is going to punish Todd Blanche for violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act? Well, that would be Todd Blanche. So, I'm sort of following along parallel to Katie Fang's lawsuit and what she's been doing, which is fantastic work. And when I first came to Substack, my intent, and I was working on Project 2025 at the time, and then I did the Big Beautiful Bill, is taking these sort of weighty documents and making them available to the everyman so that people can understand what people are voting on, what's at stake, so that it's not all legalese and complicated, and that we can all sort of participate in democracy. And so this week, Todd Blanche went into something that's called in camera. It's where he goes in front of the federal judge. There are no press there. It is not public. But what he was tasked to do by this judge was to bring in 10 examples from the Epstein files, unredacted, and then explain away why they redacted the people that they did in these files. And now, if you've at any length through the Epstein files, you could have looked at 5 documents. You will find violations of the Epstein Files Transparency Act because this act is only 4 pages long. It is extremely simple at its core. The two things to remember are A, you redact anybody and their identifying information if they are a survivor slash victim of Jeffrey Epstein or any of the people involved in this case. And B, you cannot redact anyone else who is not a survivor based on their reputation or embarrassment or are they in global politics, yada, yada, yada. If you're not a survivor, you're not supposed to be redacted. If you look at a single document, you will find 3 violations in a single document. It's everywhere. It's an epidemic. And so he was tasked in bringing 10 specific documents that Katie and her team pointed out that, show clear violations. And he was supposed to explain away why the violations or why the redactions happened and why he thinks that they were valid. And his descriptions are I always use the term tapioca pudding because it's the most bland thing I can think of. It's just the most, unintelligent pile of mush, right? He brings in these documents and he doesn't even touch on the reasons why he's redacting. So he'll have in a document a to and a from in the email, and they will be redacted. And he's like, well, they're federal agents. We had to protect their identity because they're in the case, which is valid. Doesn't mention that there are 4 co-conspirators also redacted in the body of the email. Doesn't even talk about that. And so he will present these documents as if he's explaining away something that is valid, that follows along with his guidelines. He will call people victims that we know were not victims in these files and say, well, we redacted this person here because they were a victim. We had other places where he was redacting. I think we know now it's Robert Trivers. I thought it was Alan Dershowitz, but which is a valid other discussion. But somebody talking about like, why am I being put out by saying we need to lower the age of consent to 14 years old? Like nobody understands this point of view. What girls are so mature nowadays, and they redact the person saying that, which is a clear violation of the files. They're not a survivor and there's somebody who's being redacted based on embarrassment because that's an embarrassing thing to say publicly, right? That's a ridiculous thing to say out loud. And so what I did is I went through all these 10 documents and I explained I first said what Todd Blanche is saying about them, but then I explained like what's really happening in this email. These are very simple pieces of information because Katie wants them to be simple too. She wants all of us to understand this lawsuit. It's very basic. It's very easy to sort of figure out where the violations are. And now this is the guy who, according to Pam Bondi, has been running the files the entire time and is apparently hiding the files. Like we still have what 3-4 million to go. We've been told that we already have 3 million. We probably don't. There's no real way to count that. And so it's just been this mess that's been handed to us by the guy who's really just Trump's defense lawyer, right? That's been his job the entire
And
time.
mistakenly referred to himself that way in his nomination hearings before the Senate.
Accurately referred to
Yes.
himself that way.
Right. Oh,
Right,
excuse me,
right.
Mr. Freud. Yes,
He's the
exactly.
defense lawyer from the Stormy Daniels case. So there's clear conflict of interest. His buddy, his guy, the person who's paying him is one of the most prevalent people in the files. Jamie Raskin said when they got that moment to look at these files unredacted and search in them a few months ago, his name came up over 1 million times. And we can see where those pieces are missing. I went through like I'm a math person, right? If I can turn something into math, I'll do it. And I just went through all of the emails that are in the files and I looked up by year, just the date, the year. And you have 100,000 for every year until you get to 2009. And then all of a sudden it goes down to 15,000. And it's not like people suddenly had email after 2008. Like most Americans used email as their dominant means of communication in 2008. And yet all the communication in the Epstein files goes down by at least 80% starting in 2008, which means we don't have those files. And there's a reason for that. It's very purposeful. Who was best friends during that period of time? One, Donald Trump. There you go.
I just want to note that some really incisive comments continue to stream in the chat, including from Deborah J, who says that Blanche believes that men are victims here, and points out that that's historically and biblically not really the case. But I want to highlight a question here I also want to say, just on your point, Ellie, that one of these fig leaf conditions that these two, like, ready to fold faster than Superman on laundry day senators put forward, Tom Tillis said, well, Todd Blanche, if you're going to be confirmed and get my vote, you need to meet with the Epstein survivors. And he did on July 16th. And some of them bravely went on the record. Again, this is your area of expertise, not mine, but just quoting from what's in the public record, Annie Farmer saying that Blanche was abrasive, condescending, and intentionally non-committal to survivors. Danny Bensky,
Right.
quote, it had absolutely nothing to do with us. It had everything to do with Blanche checking a box. That is the amount of
Checking a box.
consideration that
Mhm.
he is giving to survivors. But I want to turn, Glenn, to a question that just came up in the chat a couple of minutes ago from Kristen23, because I think it's a great bridge to some other topics that I want to get onto. Kristen asks, if Blanche is disbarred, can he hold his position? And I'll note, and I defer to your expertise on this, that Judge Kathleen Williams, in voiding this settlement in a 56-page opinion, referred 4 lawyers for discipline. One of them was Todd Blanche, who she referred to the New York State Bar for disbarment. What do you say to Kristen's question, and what's the likelihood that there is going to be some kind of discipline for these wildly illegal? I'm like reaching for like big thesaurus words here, mendacious attorneys who work for the Trump administration.
They're cruddy dudes. That's what I would go
There it
with.
is.
They
Thank
are
you.
cruddy dudes. And I think I have good news and bad news. So first of all, the bad news. I don't believe there is anything in, for example, the U.S. Attorney's Manual, which is the Bible by which we all practice as federal prosecutors, that addresses. I am happy to be corrected by some nerd or bureaucrat that has read every piece of paper in the Department of Justice archives. I don't think you are disqualified from serving as an attorney general if your state bar, the state in which you hold your license to practice law, has sanctioned you, has reprimanded you, has suspended you, or has disbarred you. I don't believe that is any kind of a legal impediment to Donald Trump saying, I don't care, he's still my man.
Mhm.
However, I believe that the membership in the Donald Trump Disbarred Lawyers Club is going to grow by leaps and bounds because right now it consists of a bunch of the ne'er-do-wells from his first term, right? Mainly the folks who tried to help him steal a presidential election. Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Kenneth Chesebro, Jeffrey Clark. Others have been sanctioned by their state bars, but not necessarily disbarred. That's a pretty hefty membership in the Donald Trump Disbarred Lawyers Club. I happen to believe it's going to pale in comparison with what we're going to see after Trump falls from power, and he will, because Pam Bondi, they filed an amended, a significantly beefed up ethics complaint with the Florida State Bar. It had been filed previously, but the Florida State Bar deferred because they have an internal rule with which I disagree that says we will not investigate allegations of ethical, misconduct by constitutionally appointed officers, to which I say, I don't think there's anybody that it is more important to promptly investigate their misconduct and potential crimes in office than constitutionally appointed officers. But that is not the way some state bars see it. Every state bar has its own rules and procedures, mind you,
Mm.
what they will and will not do. So I happen to think a lot of the corrupt and unethical lawyers and lawyering we are seeing in the second Trump term, because remember, federal judges from coast to coast, including Trump appointees, are calling out DOJ lawyers early and often for lying, making material omissions, misdirection, not abiding by court orders, and on and on and on. All of that does result eventually in referrals to bar counsel for all of those people. So, I do think there will be accountability that will come to Todd Blanche and Pam Bondi and others as a result of state bar ethics investigations and potential disbarment.
And yet, this is sort of the zoom out point. And I think I'm going to pose this as a question, sort of as a jump ball for both of you. I'll let you two sharp minds fight it out for who gets to go first. There's this emerging pattern. It's something that I'm very familiar with from my time as a congressional staffer. There are voices in any political office from the communications staff who are political people and from the legal staff who are legal people. And they are frequently giving conflicting pieces of advice. In the Clinton White House, what you saw is that the principals were lawyers. And so they took the legal advice. And that led them to some very bad places politically, where they could have done a lot better from a communications and crisis management standpoint, but they wanted to stay on safe legal ground. The approach in the Trump administration seems to be the opposite. It seems to be to manage the PR, including in front of judges, and forget the torpedoes. Forget the fact that you may be running afoul of your obligations as an officer of the court and be subject to later legal discipline and sanction. Look no further than the case of Jeanine Pirro, who just 4 weeks ago said, "Oh, great, we've got David Hearn, the alleged reflecting pool denigrator." She's told, "Well, we have on video here that he's not the one who did it." It's like, "Oh, good," she says. "We have him on video. This is great." She claimed multiple times that this was just a complete slam dunk. And then she later had to reverse herself in a pretty painful way, a pretty public way in front of a judge. And then she had to go do this grovel session with Trump this week, in which she sort of had to take her public thwacking for not fulfilling his bidding. I just wonder, you see this with Todd Blanche, with his representations in the Epstein case. You see it with Jeanine Pirro. You see it with Lindsay Halligan. You see it with a murderer's row of attorneys that you listed there, Glenn. I'm just wondering when we're going to see these two forces actually kind of sway the other, like come to a head, the political and communications versus the legal, and actually have the legal side get the upper hand and actually see some constraints put around the Trump administration on the kinds of things that they can say publicly that they're averring in legal filings are not true. I'll leave that as a jump ball to both of you, but when is the legal side going to win?
I'm gonna give this to you, Glenn.
Beginning in January 2029 at 12:01 p.m. on January 20th. The legal side will not rise up
Uh-huh.
and tamp down the illegality and unconstitutionality of Donald Trump or his corrupt administration. It will not. The reason I say that is what these people are doing in court, what these people are doing in grand juries is so appalling to actual sort of lawyers and prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, civil litigators. You don't have judges say, y'all are full of shit. And I am now no longer willing to give you the presumption of regularity, which is a fancy term for federal prosecutors took decades and decades and decades to build the reputation that we have walking into court. And
Mhm.
when we make a factual representation, the court credits us. Why? Because we have a presumption of regularity that we earned. And just as that federal judge in New Jersey said back during the Elena Haba nonsense up there, it took generations for this office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, to build the goodwill and credibility so that we could give you the presumption of regularity. And you people have destroyed it in less than a year. Donald, the lawyers inside the Trump administration will not rise up and protect the American people or brush Donald Trump's illegality and unconstitutionality back. That I will place my full $1 maximum bet on. It ain't gonna happen.
Is there any hope for the midterms to have any sort of impact on any of this?
Thank you, Ellie, because there's a point of light there. And the point of light is just as the Department of Justice dropped the ball during the Biden administration, with Merrick Garland refusing to get off his duff and start aggressively investigating the hierarchy, the command structure of the insurrection. He went after the boots, and I give him huge props for that. But he refused, steadfastly refused to go after the higher ups for all sorts of
Mhm.
bullshit reasons, in my estimation. Um, what got DOJ off the dime? Congressional investigations. It was the January 6th House Select Committee. Shout out to my former RICO partner and my buddy, Tim Heaphy, who was
Mm.
the chief investigative counsel, who put that thing together like it was a RICO investigation. And we all saw the product of his work and a team of great, mainly former prosecutors who, in the form of the J6 public hearings. And that finally moved the Department of Justice. What I see Congress's mission as, I am not a political guy at all, but what I see Congress's mission as after we win the House and hopefully the Senate, but the House in the midterms, is there's going to be relatively little reason to try to legislate because Donald Trump ain't going to sign anything and we're not going to have a veto-proof majority. They should be investigating the crime and corruption of Donald Trump and his cabinet members and his family members every minute of every day to at least grease the skids for the
Mhm.
Department of Justice. So when the rule of law comes back into the light of day, we're off. We're off on the accountability mission, which is
Mhm.
non-negotiable. The accountability mission, and I don't mean to be filibustering here. I still don't know what the hell a filibuster is. But, you know, people all the time they yell and scream at me, justice doesn't matter,
Mm,
Glenn, shut up. What are you
yeah.
talking about? I'm like, well, first of all, if justice didn't matter to you, you wouldn't be so angry at the
Mhm.
absence of justice. But I said, look at Richard Nixon's goons, right? They were feeling themselves. They were feeling bulletproof because they were committing crimes together with and for the benefit of a corrupt and criminal president. Nobody's going to touch them until Richard Nixon fell from power. And then
Mhm.
48 of them were criminally convicted and 30 of them went to prison. That's why I have a little note tacked up on my wall across my studio here. Believe 48, 30. And that needs to pale in comparison
Yep.
of what we do on the accountability mission come January 2029.
And Ellie, since you generously kind of teed up the question of the midterm elections, I'll just quickly insert that one of the things I do on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson, is I do a weekly check-in on where we stand for the midterms. Look, I'm a Democrat.
Mhm.
I work for several Democratic members of Congress, ran congressional campaigns. And so I'm not trying to feed people hopium. I want to try to give people a weekly look at where we stand, where the scoreboard, the dashboard is, and give it in a straightforward, honest, but let's face it, we get too much negative news that washes over us. So hopefully an upbeat way. And, What I was showing on my midterm HQ report just this past week is everything that you and Glenn are talking about is making an impact. The message is
Mhm.
seeping into people. We've had poll after poll in the past few days that have come in and confirmed that Donald Trump is at his lowest approval rating ever for him. Second lowest since the dawn of organized polling with the Gallup organization in like 1946. He's at his lowest ebb for a president. The only president who was lower was Richard Nixon in the days before he left office. And we're
Mhm.
seeing other indicators that are consistently showing that his net approval among independents, just a steady drip downward. The
Yeah.
generic ballot continues to be extremely strong for Democrats. And voters are saying consistently on very interesting kind of like probing polling questions, things like they think that Republicans and the Trump administration, only 8% say that their policies are aimed at people like them. 62% say they're aimed at people more like the Trump administration and people who are already very wealthy. The sense that politicians are horribly corrupt has begun to
Mhm.
seep in to the electorate, and it is making an impact. So I completely
Yeah.
agree with Glenn's political prescription here, which is that's job number one, for the incoming
Mhm.
Congress is to start putting some depth into this with investigation, and starting to really get to the bottom of the level of corruption that we've seen. Um, all right, let me, now since you kind of set both of us up, I feel like, I'd like to turn it back to you. You know, there are an awful lot of people who are on this live stream who,
Mhm.
subscribe to Glenn or subscribe to me, and don't necessarily follow what you do week in and week out.
Right.
And I think like most people, one of the most underappreciated facets of American politics is just how little all of us, even high information people, like the kinds of people who are on this live stream, how little information we pay to the week to week news. As you've already laid out, the Epstein saga is unbelievably complex. Millions of documents, some of which have been released, some of which have been heavily redacted,
Mhm.
all kinds of names, people in the administration. At this point, it would be faster and simpler to keep a list of people who are not otherwise implicated in the Epstein debacle, in the Trump administration than to list all the people who are. So I'd like to do a bit of a step back with you. Could you just get us smart on where do we stand? Where, like, what's the 30,000-foot
Mhm.
view on where this has landed and why it matters so much? Why this is a story that people continue to pay so much attention to?
Well, I mean, I think well, for me, let me just step back and say for me, this is kind of one of those I didn't come here to write about the Epstein files. I didn't really know about the Epstein files. This is sort of a moment where you make plans and God laughs, and that's kind of how I got here. But ultimately, I think for a lot of us, there's especially for women, there's a lot of reasons why people pay attention to these files, just because statistically, the idea of childhood sex abuse is so rampant, and so many people can relate to it. But then, like in my case, it's I'm a parent. I have 4 kids entering this world, and I see the Epstein files as 2 different defining moments. It is bringing justice to what's already happened, but it's also preventing it from ever happening again, and that is almost more important that this never ever happens again, and one of the things that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that, is go state by state and raise the age of consent to 18 years old, which
Mm,
seems logical, but there are 32 states where the age of consent is under the age of 18. We still have child marriage laws. Republicans are still voting in support of those child marriage laws. These are really basic needs that we have in our country to make sure something like the Epstein files never happens again. But just on like a basic level, again, we have millions of files at our behest that we don't necessarily have access to. They've given us the DOJ search page. We can look for things, but they've made it really as clunky and hard to dig through as possible. And so I and a good chunk of people have sort of made it our life's work now to dig through these things, and that's where Substack has come in as this amazing resource, as a crowdsourcing opportunity for people who are available to do this, who can do it in chunks, who maybe aren't triggered as much by it, so that the people who are triggered don't have to stick their heads into this pile. But we have worked together to, some people might do the Todd Blanche piece of it, some people might do the Donald Trump piece of it. Everybody's sort of working on one piece. Right now, I'm working on the Interlock and Music Camp side of it. And just finding everything that we can find that we do have that hasn't been hidden, that hasn't been suppressed, and then also finding these clues about what has been suppressed. And again, I go back to Katie Fang's lawsuit. Really, really helpful because now we can pay attention to the pieces we are missing. Again, before 2009, most of it's gone. We don't have it anymore, or we were never given it. And that is almost all email conversations by people who make over, I don't know, $100 million a year, right? This is a very financial club. And when we talk about, I think in the beginning we talked about, oh, there's a list of 10 co-conspirators and where is the list and where's the list? I think we know now it is not 10 people. It is probably hundreds of people. And really, the defining factor is financial. If you made over a certain amount of money at a time and a place during these files, you were in the files and you were somehow linked either to the sex crimes or to the financial crimes or just the sort of social swill of hanging out with this neighborhood of people that you shouldn't have been hanging out with. And I always point to there's a list from 2010, September 2010, of a Yom Kippur dinner at Epstein's house. And it is a list of people that are not just these sort of terrible predator types, but they're people that I look up to. They're people who are on Substack. There are people who I consider to be good people, and how they ended up eating dinner at this man's house post a sexual conviction that involved 36 underage children. And is there this idea of sticking our heads in the sand? Is there this idea of not believing survivors? Like it's just so long and complicated, and I don't think when the Trump administration came out and they brought out those sort of empty binders and they said, "Ha ha, we've done it. The Epstein files are over." I don't think they realized what they were dealing with the American people and the level of intelligence that we have, the level of determination, and the level of passion we have towards children and protecting them. I think they thought, like with everything the Trump administration had done prior, that they could just sort of skirt things past us and it would be over our heads and he would get away with things. But this was the one thing that the American public was not willing to ignore, not willing to move past. And they had, what was it, 1,000 FBI agents in the DOJ filtering through these emails, filtering through everything, and then before they gave it to us, and they didn't realize out here they have millions of people doing the same thing. So of course we're finding more. Of course we're realizing that people are in the files who are not supposed to be in the files. Of course we're finding, what was it, 4,000 payments made from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein, that Senator Wyden is now making public. Like there are all these things that they thought we would never a, see, but also B, we would never scream about, we would never make
Mm.
public, we would never put 2 and 2 together. And you have people from all different backgrounds. I do not have a legal background. I do not have a political background, right? Like I have I'm a classics major from the University of Washington. Like
Oh, you
I'm
must
like,
be
oh,
loving this Odyssey week.
yes, yes, that is my thing. But like I have the ability to read and understand and know what this is. And then if I have an extra skill somewhere to help somebody else who maybe can't read it or understand, then I can do that. But I have worked with people who are in like the psych field. I have worked with people in law enforcement, private investigators, people who are like they study fonts and how to figure out what's behind these redactions, and there are so many skills out here from working class people that we are solving one of the biggest cases in US history while the DOJ sits on their thumbs and does nothing for these survivors.
I think what you've really pointed to is what gets me about the story, and I mean, you can see in the chat if you're following it, and it's really remarkable. What I think gets a lot of people is that this is very personal for them. There are people who are very
Mhm.
bravely sharing that they're victims of childhood sexual abuse. There are people sharing the painful aspect of this, that Epstein is Jewish, and this feels awfully a lot like the kind of libel that has been thrown at Jewish people since the dawn of time,
Mhm.
that there is a cabal of wealthy Jewish people with worldwide ties and deep financial assets, who are secretly running the world. And what's so painful about this is that aspect that you brought up, that there's 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 some truth in it in this case.
Mhm. Mm.
Not because Jeffrey Epstein was Jewish, but because there was this wealthy cabal of mutually back scratching politicos and business people and people in international intelligence agencies, all doing mutual favors for one another and chumming it up and having dinner on Yom Kippur. I hope this was a break the fast. I mean, for
It was,
goodness
I
sakes,
think.
none of these people are being inscribed in
But
the book of life, okay, just to be clear, but I mean, goodness.
but, I mean, later on, there's an email saying and this is, a certain period of time past this, but they said that it was meant to be his welcome back into society after getting out of jail,
Oh, good
right?
grief.
And then you have this list of people where you're going, "What is Jane Fonda doing at his house?" Right? Like, why is this person who otherwise does really good things well, and I when I was studying up on all the, like, Howard Letnick stuff and this idea of him going to the island and saying, "I knew nothing about the history of Jeffrey Epstein," it's a really simple Google search to figure out how many headlines happened in New York City alone between, let's say, 2006 and 2012 that talk about what Jeffrey Epstein did in New York City major newspapers as headlines, and there was over 300 headlines about him and his sexual exploits against children in, like, the New York Times, and the New York Post, and Wall Street Journal, and so for all these people to be like, "I had no idea," it's hard for me to believe, right? Did you just not know, or did you think, that idea, "It's New York, we have clubs, there's kids who show up," it just is hard for me to believe that people absolutely knew nothing about his reputation, and yet they knew enough about him to go have a dinner at his house.
I wanna give you a moment because there's been a request in the chat from Catherine Maddox to go I wanna let you scroll back because she had a question for you, but Glenn, I
Oh,
wanted to
mm,
ask you, it's a version of the same question that I posed to Ellie. It is such a fire hose. I feel like a lion looking at a herd of zebra, and I just see only stripes. There's such a flood the zone overload of corruption and mendacity, to reuse my $1,000,000 word, and misrepresentations, unlawfulness. It's like I'm beating around the bush. These are lying scumbags who are running our country, and our legal system is at pains to discipline them, to rein them in, to try to put some kind of constraints around this. I tried to compile the numbers and I can't. I mean, CNN did a decent job of it. Um, I'm trying to find my numbers here, but there are literally thousands of legal rebukes from federal judges. Federal judges, you don't fuck around with federal judges. And there are thousands of these rebukes of sanctions, of, referrals, for discipline to all of these attorneys. Every night, you follow this and you talk in your community gatherings about what's happened that day, how to process it, how to understand it from a legal standpoint. If you can reach back into your mental Rolodex of the last 100 days or so, what stands out that people may have missed in that overwhelming flood? What's a story that you wish people had paid more attention to because it really stood out to you?
You know, I suffer from having the zone flooded with crime and corruption the way everybody else does, because you know what comes to mind? It's like the last half dozen most outrageous things he's done. And
You've
that
got
is on top
availability bias like the
that's
rest
on
of
top
us.
of 6 million other outrageous things that he's done. And people say it's too much crime and corruption for us ever to get our arms around. And I respond, it's actually too much crime and corruption for us not to get our arms around when, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, the rule of law comes back into the light of day. And they're counting on that. I mean, when you think about the term flood the zone, I'm an old football guy. My pop was a high school football coach, so I lived and breathed football, wrestling, and boxing. Um, when you put so much into a particular zone that it can't be handled, it can't be defended against, right? It can't be addressed with the rules that are in place and the systems and institutions we have. And that's what he's done. What I do wish, Matt, is that corporate media, and I'll never stop sort of rooting for corporate media to do better than it has done in the age of Trump. I do think independent media, which is what the three of us are and what we're doing every day, is
Right.
the wave of the present, not just the wave of the future. And I think corporate media is on a downward trend right now. But, just I'll use one example that is compelling to me in recent days. What we now know about the great reflecting pool caper and the unlawful arrest of 67-year-old Olympic canoeist David Hearn
That's a thing, by
is
the
that
way.
is that this whole sad chapter in the Department of Justice's behavior goes back to Donald Trump issuing 2 no-bid contracts
Right.
to cronies of his, one of whom was convicted in 2001 of conspiracy to bribe a member of Congress. That is John Cafaro. Forget about it. If you've seen a picture of this guy with his red velvet jacket and his big cigar and a paid, I don't know who she was. I'm not going to say that. And somebody on his arm, this entire episode goes back to Donald Trump delivering 2 no-bid contracts to his crony buddies, one to refurbish the pool and the other to get rid of the algae. And that is why everything broke bad and went sideways. And the project was, to quote the report from the Department of the Interior, botched and rushed. And yet, what do? They start arresting people without cause and without evidence because Donald Trump has declared from on high that it was all vandalism. It wasn't my giving my crony buddies no bid contracts. Well, yes, it was, Donald. And corporate media just moved on to the next thing when he says, for example, "Oh, I don't know the firm that got that no bid contract. Not my type. I never met them." Right? And corporate media lets it go.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
saturates the public is the freshest Trump lie.
Right.
Corporate media has dropped the ball. And listen, I worship at the altar of the fourth estate. I was a journalism major undergrad. I revered the study and the practice of journalism, but we've blown it. And that
Mhm.
is giving the flooding of the zone the opportunity to deceive.
It's such a great point. You've made a connection there. It's something that I was struggling just this morning to figure out how to write about. I'm writing a co-authored piece on Substack with Dan Perry, the former lead editor for the Associated Press for the Middle East and for Europe. At various times in his career for tomorrow. And we're trying to imagine what the world would have looked like in 2026 if Kamala Harris had won in 2024. And I was trying to write about, and you'll see it if you subscribe, please do, and read this tomorrow. I was trying to explain why I felt it was appropriate to smush together the idea of undermining the rule of law with the personal self-enrichment, self-emolument that Trump has undertaken under his administration. I think you just made that linkage perfectly. One leads directly to the other. The no-bid contract, this underhanded mechanism of flouting the law, flouting legal authority, overreaching beyond what his executive power would allow him to do, is what leads what leads to the personal corruption and then these legal repercussions and then this kind of rotating credit card of debt theory of communications that the Trump administration practices, whereby they move from scandal and outrage to scandal and outrage because they care more about trending on social media than and just outliving till the next thing takes its place in our mental scanners than they do about sticking to the truth or making representations to a legal authority or a judge. And that's what lands us here. And the media is so overwhelmed and so hungering for that next story because they need to get the eyeballs that they're right in cahoots with it. They go along with it.
Mhm.
And so we end up on this merry-go-round of lies and corruption. And I will go back to the point you raised earlier, Ellie, and then I'll go back to let you actually answer the question that the viewer asked. I do think that there's a silver lining here. There's a ray of hope. This is breaking through. to voters. The Stanford political scientist Adam Bonica, who's on Substack, who I've had on this show, has been making this point. He thinks that corruption is the next big issue for Democrats to hang on to hang their hat on, that this is where we need to go. We need accountability. It's job number one for the incoming Congress. It's something that's within their power to do, and it's breaking through with voters. Okay, we did it. Glenn,
Okay.
you don't even know what a filibuster is. I do,
Oh.
but we've done it together. Given Ellie some time to review and respond to the question from the chat. So go to it.
I was gonna say you should go watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington because that's the
Mhm.
best movie about a filibuster. It's one of my very favorites. So, okay, I wanted to answer Catherine Maddox's question because it's a good one. It's about the idea of people's names being in the files and not vilifying them just because their names are in the files, because there are all sorts of reasons somebody's name might be in the Epstein files. Obama's name is in the Epstein files. Jon Stewart's name is in the Epstein files. Anybody who is discussed in an email is going to have their name pop up in the files. And it doesn't mean they have anything to do with anything. It just means somebody was talking about them, right? A big one that people discuss is Bill Clinton and his is he in the files? How is he in the files? I will say, for as much as I have dug through these files for months and months and months, I have not found an instance of him abusing children. Was he in proximity to places he shouldn't have been? Yes. Did he abuse children so far? Not that I can tell. In the case of like this Yom Kippur list and these people who are on dinner lists, in that case specifically, it does indicate who was attending and who was not attending. There's like a not coming section of the list. So, in all reality, the people on the list probably went to this dinner, which can be very disappointing. There's very good people on that list. Doesn't mean they're child abusers, and I indicate this a lot because I wrote a lot about like Michael Wolff in this case and the closest that he had with Epstein and the things that I felt were not good in his position in journalism. But I always say, as a caveat, I'm not saying that somebody like that is molesting children. I'm saying they're in a place where they're not supposed to be giving knowledge, giving help, further clearing the way for somebody who is doing bad things. And the journalism world back then was pretty messy. I mean, in this case, there were times when they were in cahoots and helping Epstein become like this great bachelor billionaire in New York City. And then there were times when he was taking advantage of them too. And somebody brought up Tina Brown, and she's a great example of that because I think Tina Brown was working for the Daily Beast back then, and she there was lots of people writing for the Daily Beast and Epstein stories and that type of thing. And then you have this sort of behind the scenes email conversation later on with Michael Wolff where he's telling Epstein he's going to neutralize Tina Brown, meaning he's going to discredit her. He's going to take away these stories about Epstein where people are trying to do what Julie K. Brown did and expose this guy for what he was. There was a lot of Julie K's before Julie K, and they were covered up, right? They were removed from the system so that their stories didn't get through. And so at some point, there was this sort of discrediting campaign against Tina Brown and other people who were coming forward to write about Epstein in a truthful manner, not about his philanthropy, not about his being a bachelor, but talking about his actual criminal history. And it was covered up, it was removed, it was discredited, it was never published. And Tina Brown was one of those people. So there was at a time that she would have been not in a circle. She was not in a social circle, but she would have been in proximity to Epstein, writing about some of these cases. We think of Vicky Ward's original 2003 article writing about Epstein and how much was removed from that article that could have been really valuable, that was removed by Vanity Fair. Was a world where people wrote about people, and it wasn't that they were patting them on the back or they were part of this, what we now consider a cabal, but it's New York City, and it much has to do with this sort of prestige and quote unquote small town fame of people living in the city and doing things in the city and being prestigious in the city and writing about each other and then turning around and stabbing each other in the backs, which very much happened with some of these bigger magazines and newspapers. So that's the case of Tina Brown. But again, it is very important when you hear things about people being in the Epstein files because along with there being these what we call 302s, FBI interviews, very credible witness testimony that comes forward, there are also hundreds of people who called the FBI to make a statement about Epstein that is absolute bunk. And they will say, I was in a room with Biden and Obama and Mickey Mouse and Ronald McDonald and Epstein, and we were all partying together. And so those names are now inevitably in the files, but it's not a true statement. So yes, we do have to be very cognizant of not everybody whose name pops up in these searches is cronying up to Epstein, is not part of this cabal, is not doing illegal things. But we do want to question people who sort of hung out and maybe turned a blind eye to some of the things that were common knowledge in New York City at the time.
I see that we're approaching the top of the hour. So I want to do something. I'm going to preview my final closing question to each of you. And then I'm going to filibuster for just like a second to give you both time to prepare and think about it. No cold calling, no Socratic method stress tests like used to happen in law school, apparently. Um, what I'm going to ask you in just a moment is to look into your personal crystal ball on the basis of your expertise and let all of us know what you're watching for in the next month. What's on your radar that you think is really significant that's coming up, coming at us, legal proceedings that are going to come to a head, decisions that this administration is going to make, rulings that might be coming forward. So I'll let you both stew on that for a second. And I'll just say quickly before we break entirely and before you guys answer that, first of all, so many incredible comments here. I really wish I could address them all. Vicky JH78 says to me, we need all those connections put together and relating to each other. I mean, absolutely. I think what we're trying to do with meetings like this, what Glenn does on his community meeting every single night is call out what's the story you need to know about and make those connections together. Ellie, what you're doing is you're wading through all of this so that the
Mhm.
rest of us who don't have the mental wherewithal to do it or the time to do it, don't have to, and we can understand what we really need to know. And that's what I'm trying to do on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson, especially as regards the upcoming midterm elections. I'm trying to filter through all the information and indications, the polling averages, the expert analysis to try and give people the bottom line on what's happening politically that they really need to know about. So I hope people will consider subscribing to all three of us. That is my little ad placement and shilling for the moment. Let's start with you, Ellie. What do you have your eye on over the next month or so that people can be looking out for like a pro, like you do?
Again, I've said this a couple of times, is Katie Fang's lawsuit against the DOJ. I think if it can go to fruition, go all the way through, and if we can get all these files with survivors redacted, that's very important. The survivors need to remain redacted. Their personal identifying information needs to remain redacted. But if we could get all the files, there is a lot of stuff we're missing. I have FOIA'd, I feel like I spent half my life FOIAing information. I have FOIA'd Donald Trump's flight logs because I continue to tell people he's not carpooling. He's not flying around in Epstein's jet. If he's going to meet him places, he's going in his own jet. I have I have FOIA'd Epstein's ankle monitor, his GPS of his ankle monitor, because I'm convinced that he wasn't where he was supposed to be when he was leaving the jail cells. And we now know that now that the woman Rosa Gillis has come forward and we've heard some of the stories of things that happened while he was supposed to be in jail. I want to see all the logs, all the flights, all the files that are prior to 2009 that we do not have, that are missing, that sometimes they forget, and we'll find a little Easter egg in there that they forgot. But I want to see all of those because you're going to get the whole story. You're going to get the whole story about the falling out of Trump's friendship. You're going to get the whole story of everything that led up to meeting Ghislaine Maxwell, which I do not think was in 1991. You're going to get all the information about Robert Maxwell, and you're going to get all the relationships, all the financial stuff, everything in between. And that is what we don't have. So that is what I'm hopeful for.
Well, I will say in the chat that the biggest question that's coming up is, Ellie, how do you manage with 4 kids? I only have 3. I don't know the answer to that. All right, Glenn, over to
Glenn's
you.
got
What do you
6, right?
Yeah, right. Glenn's got 6? All right. Damn, I didn't even know that, and you dunked on both of us. All right. I'll give you the last word. What are you watching out for?
I think any election related court cases, because, the Trump administration keeps trying to get voter rolls and voter information from the states. And at last count, I think they've lost 19. It's like 19-0. I could be wrong on the number. Donald Trump is signing unlawful executive orders saying, yeah, I don't want the post office to deliver mail in ballot. We have all of this lunacy going on.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of keenly interested in which, if any, of these election interference cases make their way up to the Supreme Court, and what does the Supreme Court do with them? I think we hit a low point with the sort of gerrymandering decisions, and when the Supreme Court
Mhm.
said intentionally, racially discriminatory redistricting is good by us. That is horrific. It's horrific. I'm in Virginia. I voted that we should redistrict, and my vote got thrown out by the Supreme Court. And I
Mhm.
voted we should do it to meet the force of Donald Trump's dirty redistricting. Our Supreme Court is in a really bad way right now. I don't know that that's breaking news. We've had a number of Supreme Court justices who spent their lives trying to convince us, dupe us into believing they were textualists, only to have them completely disregard the text of the Constitution and, for example, grant a president damn near absolute immunity from prosecution. Then they kind of came back strong-ish on the birthright citizenship case. But I do think voting is often the whole ball game, because it's up to us to get to the midterms in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, to make sure we overcome all of the voter intimidation efforts that the Trump administration will throw at us. And I believe we will. But if the Supreme Court continues to assist Donald Trump in, expanding executive power to let him interfere in state elections, and elections are the province of the states, then I fear we may not make it through the midterm. So I think what I'm most interested in from that 30,000-foot view is what's going on with these court cases that, involve Donald Trump attempting to interfere with the elections and the courts brushing him back.
I'll just give a very quick one to give people a glimmer of hope looking up ahead. One of the most significant polling findings that I've seen in recent weeks is the fact that likely voters have swung over to favor Democrats. That's a profound change from the last two election cycles. What that means is that as pollsters start to swing over from polling among registered voters to polling among likely voters, which tends to happen as we approach Labor Day, you should start to see more and more polls swing by a few points toward the Democrats, and that should hopefully better reflect what I believe is going on in the country, which is a massive and profound shift toward Democrats, and what I think is going to be a very strong midterm election and a rebuke to the Trump administration and all of the corruption and illegality that we've been talking about in this hour. And I have to thank both of you, Glenn and Ellie, for a really extraordinary discussion, which you can tell in the chat that people have really appreciated. They appreciate your expertise, all of your hard work, your dogged persistence, Ellie, in going after this story as a citizen, which should be what government people are doing, but you're doing it
Mhm.
on all of our behalf. Glenn, your nightly explanations of everything that's going on the legal front, it's invaluable. I hope people will subscribe to both of you and to me. And I will say, on behalf of our collective 13 children among all of us,
You did
thank
the
you,
math.
everyone, for being here, for supporting us. And over the next week, everyone, please stay safe, be well. We'll see you soon.
All right, thanks, guys. Good to see you.